the member and call the member for Denison.
Well, Deputy Speaker, the community is well and truly sick to death of the inaction over live animal exports. What we saw a few weeks ago now on 60 Minutes was just another episode of many episodes. It was not an isolated incident. In that shocking footage of the Awasi Express, a vessel on which over 2,000 sheep died on one voyage alone, it was dreadful in itself, but it was not an isolated incident. In fact, when you add it to a whole lot of other incidents over many, many years, you see we have a systemic problem here. Because we've seen exposés and we've heard reports from vessels and from destination countries as diverse as China, Vietnam, repeated exposés of animal cruelty in Indonesia. We saw that footage of live Australian sheep being buried alive in Pakistan. We've had the repeated exposés out of a number of countries in the Middle East, including Israel and up in Turkey. We have a systemic problem, and the Awasi Express was not an isolated incident. We need action. We do not need another inquiry, and we certainly do not need an inquiry headed by Dr Michael McCarthy, because he's an industry insider. He has worked for Emmanuel, he's worked for Wellards, he's worked for a number of the big companies and stakeholders in the live animal export trade. Now, I'm not saying that Dr McCarthy is not a good person, but how a government could think it's appropriate to have such an industry insider to head an inquiry, it beggars belief. We do not need tinkering with the current arrangements, tinkering with the regulations, a bit more oversight, slightly reduce the number of sheep on any one vessel. Because the fact is, the cruelty is so systemic, the problems are so systemic, that the only way to end the cruelty is to end the trade. That's what the community is looking for. The community is looking to this government to finally be the government that will put an end to the live animal export trade, and in particular to the trade in live sheep to the Middle East, most of whom go across the equator and go into the Middle East at the height of a northern summer. That's what the community is looking for, Deputy Speaker, is to end the trade. And we want to put an end to all these ridiculous excuses we hear. You know, this excuse that people in the Middle East will only buy live sheep. What nonsense! The Middle East market already buys over $600 million a year of processed sheep meat from Australia. That's frozen and chilled meat, compared to only $250 million of live sheep. They already buy processed meat. They will buy more processed meat if we stop the export of live sheep. And what about this nonsense about people in the Middle East don't have refrigerators? I mean, what a racist comment. Of course they've got refrigerators. Where do we think they're putting the $600 million of frozen and chilled meat that we're sending already? And this excuse that their religion requires them to have live sheep from Australia. What nonsense! So many of our abattoirs in Australia are already halal certified, and they're the abattoirs that are already supplying that over $600 million a year of processed sheep meat. Or this nonsense that we need to do this to supply protein to the world's disadvantaged. What trot, Deputy Speaker? This isn't a humanitarian operation. This is business. And the only reason we're shipping these hundreds of thousands of sheep to the Middle East and other animals to other parts of the world is to make money. It's not about supplying protein. It's not a humanitarian mission. It's about money. And this nonsense that if we don't send sheep to the Middle East, then someone else will. Well, of course, that's the old drug dealer's defence. You know, we have a moral responsibility to do the right thing, and what some people do in other countries is their business. Or this nonsense that we don't have enough abattoirs. We have a huge surge capacity in existing Australian abattoirs. And any sort of transition period over, maybe a couple of years to wind the trade up, that would provide more than enough time for existing abattoirs to expand and even new abattoirs to be built. And this nonsense about we can't shut down the trade because people will be out of work. Well, the fact is a darn sight more people have been forced out of work in recent years because of the expansion of the live animal export trade and the fact that it's taken work away from Australian abattoirs. Deputy Speaker, the fact is the live animal export trade, and in particular the export of live sheep to the Middle East, is systemically cruel. It's not in Australia's economic self-interest, and it doesn't have popular support. And the only way to end the cruelty, The only way to meet the expectations of the community is to shut the trade down.